Today, everybody, is the day I've been telling you guys to wait for. It is Alex coming back at you with another video. And today we're going to be bringing on Brett Kollmann. Brett, thank you so much for making the time for this show. We're going to be talking about a couple of 2024 draft players, but also going to be looking back on 2023, looking at the season as a whole, and just having a really good time. Brett, thank you for coming on. Feel free to give yourself a shout out.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it. We made it through another draft season. Worse for wear as always, but ready to take the 2 days off that we get annually before we dive back in.
I know. I didn't even take a couple of days off. I ended up just dropping a mock draft the same day. It's absolute, these eye bags are earned, Brett. Trust me, you know it. You know as well as I do. But yeah, I just wanted to be able to start talking about the 2024 class. We obviously you've dug into a couple of guys, the top ones especially, and I want to talk actually about Marvin Harrison Jr. to start out, because we've seen this extremely loaded Ohio State class. You see Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Jack Smith and Jigba, and then guys before them as well. How does Marvin Harrison, from what you've seen, stack up against them? And for me, I think he's going to be gold jacket worthy if I'm just going to put my way too early bet down. But I'm curious what you think the ceiling and the floor are going to be.
He's a lot different than Olave and JSN. I would say in terms of all these Ohio State receivers, who he's most similar to, I'd say Garrett Wilson. But even then, he still has some differences to Garrett Wilson. He's very much a jump ball specialist, but I don't mean that in the sense that that's all he can do. It's more so that's his superpower, right?
Yeah.
Getting one-on-one down the boundary. And as long as you're throwing it to the right leverage, or even sometimes when you don't throw it to the right leverage, he's going to come down with it. Very reminiscent. This is a comp that I saw recently to young AJ Green in terms of frame and length and sideline awareness. There's some, apologize if you hear the sirens, by the way.
It's all good.
There's some sideline catches that he made where I don't know how his knees didn't explode when he hit the ground, because it's just such awkward angles that he lands on. But he makes it work, man. He's an artist within that kind of last 12 inches before the boundary. And that's kind of just, obviously everything else is great. He's a great route runner. He's got size, he's got speed, but just the ability to win any ball on the boundary when his quarterback needs a play. That's why he's going to go in the top 5.
Yeah, no, I think that he's just so awesome. The thing is, we've been talking a lot about Kalen King. Actually, he's coming out next year from Penn State. Joey Porter's number 2, as this guy who, even on PFF's original board, he's top 15. And I mean, I really put a lot of emphasis on that game when I was watching Joey Porter Jr. For the record, I'm a Steelers fan, so gotta love it. But I just saw Marvin Harrison have such polish to his game at such an early age. And even when it comes to the release, he's just super fluid. And I love that to death about him. To me, he's my number 2 player in the class, because, I'm going to let you have a little bit of a fan affair here, but Caleb Williams, even though I just talked about someone having a gold jacket ceiling, we kind of already know, and I saw a tweet from you earlier today, it looks like a lot of people kind of know what this guy's kind of supposed to be.
Yeah, there's basically 8 teams in the NFL that if they end up at number 1, they would trade the pick.
Yeah.
The other 24 would take Caleb Williams, and it almost doesn't matter who they have.
Mm-hmm.
The Chiefs have Mahomes, the Bills have Allen, well, actually, let me just run through it. So Mahomes, Allen, Lamar, obviously, because he just got a bunch of money. Hurts, because he just got a bunch of money. Burrow, Herbert, Lawrence. I might be missing one.
Yeah.
But other than that, every team in the NFL would take Caleb Williams. If you don't have one of those top 8 guys, you're taking Caleb.
I'll ask you this, Brett. So when it comes to Kyler Murray, he has about 50 million in dead cap. If I'm not mistaken, it might be 48. But obviously the Arizona Cardinals are listed in terms of betting odds as, the final team, and the Houston Texans are technically the second. So in most of the mock draft simulators, they're 1 and 2. So how do you think that the Cardinals would handle that type of dead cap situation if they are sitting there at 1, and you probably have one of the best quarterback prospects of all time on your hands, when you have your quarterback that you paid, and you also have a quarterback that has a lot of talent, just can't really stay healthy?
They would eat it. They would take Caleb. They would just eat it. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, we got to have one cap hit for 1 year to get this guy who might be one of the best quarterback prospects ever. Like,
Mhm.
and all respect to Kyler. Kyler went first overall.
He
He's
did.
not as good as Caleb
Mhm.
in terms of prospects, right? Like Caleb, totally different planet than Kyler when Kyler was coming out of college. So
Yeah.
they would take Caleb for me,
Okay.
and they would just eat the cap hit. They'd figure it out.
Understandable. I mean, I would as well, but there's just the majority of the comments are primarily focused around that dead cap and whether the Cardinals would take it. Now, let's just say the Cardinals decide to trade out of that spot. What do you think teams would be willing to give up? Obviously, again, way too early, way too early. But let's just say a team sitting at 5. What do you think that if they do think this man might be the next Patrick Mahomes, better than Trevor Lawrence coming out? What do you think the price would be, roughly?
Three ones, three
Yeah.
twos, three threes, plus probably some players.
Holy crap. Okay, so yeah, basically every single pick imaginable. It's gonna
All
be
the
William
assets,
Williams. Yep.
all of all of them.
Understandable, understandable. Because I had to deal with that yesterday because I just dropped, a mock draft as well where I decided to trade out with the Cardinals just to, test the idea, and it's impossible to gauge the value of a Patrick Mahomes level prospect because they're invaluable. Teams just won't be willing to trade them. So that's great. Now, when we look back on this past draft class, obviously you have Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, like those were considered the top 2. You got Anthony Richardson, who some people had it too. I was a psychopath and did that myself. Judge me all you want. But what do you think in terms of after Caleb Williams? I know you haven't dug too deep into the class, if at all. But what do you think? What have you been hearing about the sentiment about after Caleb Williams compared to the top 3?
I know that teams love Drake May.
Okay.
Uh, they love him.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be surprised if their grades are also astronomical on Drake May. I wouldn't be
Mhm.
surprised if they see that both of the guys next year as being even better than Young. And everybody loved Bryce Young.
Mhm.
Like everybody thought Bryce Young was just Joe Burrow but smaller. And I
Yeah.
wouldn't be surprised if they like. I know that teams have a higher grade on Caleb, but like I
Mhm.
wouldn't be surprised if they also have a higher grade on May. I just haven't checked into that. But
Gotcha.
I mean, he's incredibly impressive,
Mhm.
right? And in most years he would be seen as like the Caleb of that year. He just happens to be in the same year as the actual Caleb Williams.
For
Uh,
sure.
and Caleb like is seen as Trevor Lawrence level prospect, um, but more creative.
Mm.
Like when things break down, right?
Yeah.
I think there are some things within structure he could still clean up, but like he's
Mhm.
got a genius level football IQ. Like
Yeah.
talking to some friends that are in the program, the stuff that he does in meetings is just as impressive as the stuff he does on the field. Like he is seen as like a genius level football talent that is
Mhm.
also really mobile, can throw from any arm angle, and just he's legit.
Yeah.
And May, I think I haven't dug as much into May, but like
Mm.
just the 3 games that I've watched, I'm like, damn, he'd probably go first overall in most classes too. He just
Yeah.
happens to be in the same one as Caleb.
Dude, Drake May is awesome, especially the high level plays. I think it was versus Notre Dame. It was one of the first snaps. He bailed out of the pocket and threw it's probably 35 yards down the field in like on a rope to like the most perfect position possible. There was like 1 yard of separation, if that. He makes some incredible plays. Now, I'm curious about this, and it's the offensive scheme factor. Obviously, we saw Sam Howell, who was considered honestly a pretty solid quarterback, fall to the 5th round years ago. And well, I say years ago, it was 2 years ago. Whoop de doo. But I'm curious about exactly how the system might affect or that reputation of UNC might affect Drake May, even though, his talent might be up here. Do you think some people might be a little hesitant on the exact tape translating to the NFL?
I think that's a big reason why. Well, I don't know this for sure. I'm
Yeah.
speculating, but the timing of Drake May flirting with the portal, and then all of a sudden Phil Longo was gone, and then all of a sudden Drake May committed back to North
Yeah.
Carolina. I don't think that was an accident
Mm,
because Phil Longo's offense, even though it puts up a lot of points,
mhm.
it it doesn't do a whole lot in terms of showing what somebody can do in the NFL, right? Because it's a
Fair.
very simplistic offense.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of it is we're throwing slants, curls, and go balls, right? Like
Yep.
every play is like 989. It's crazy, and then there's a
Yep.
whole bunch of screens, and I don't know. It's not really like an NFL type offense. Um, Keep in mind, once upon a time, Phil Longo, when he was at Ole Miss, he had DK Metcalf and AJ Brown, and managed to make both of them look like second round receivers. So it's a
Yeah.
hard offense for NFL teams to evaluate, and I think that was a big
Mhm.
reason why North Carolina's like, let's get something different for this next year to really
Yeah.
show what Drake can do, right?
Mhm.
Um, and I think that he does have an absolute golden opportunity to challenge Caleb
Yeah.
for like that anointed one spot. Um, and he has so much talent that I wouldn't be shocked if he's in the running.
That's great. It's great that you brought up that point because he was trying, Drake May was trying to get out of UNC before recommitting once the offense changed. Now, I know when we're talking about offenses that might not exactly translate, Heupel over at Tennessee, a lot of people were saying that, well, especially when it comes to Jalen Hyatt, this guy's running pretty much streaks from a very advantageous position. He has a safety lined up on him. He's pretty much out as wide as possible. Do you think that, when it comes to the draft stock last year, do you think Tennessee's offense drops the value of quarterbacks because of the fact that it's not fully translatable, a lot of screens and maybe a lot of go balls?
Oh, 100% it does.
Yeah.
100%. Because um you look at like the deep choice concept that they ran all the time, like that like
Mhm.
was their offense, right?
Yeah.
Um, and how it's structured, they kind of break it down into lanes. Like lane one is like numbers to sideline. Lane two is
Mhm.
like hash to numbers, and
Mhm.
remember college hashes are wider,
Yeah.
right? And so they basically like have these certain option routes depending on the lane you're in, and like you're reading the safety, and depending on where the safety goes, that determines what route you're running. And
Mhm.
if you're getting a bail technique, if you're in lane one and you're getting a bail technique from the corner, you're running a hitch.
Yeah.
And like it's basically designed so that no matter what, you can't cover it because
That's
the
fair.
houses are so wide and there's so much space
Mm.
that like you literally can't cover it, right?
Yeah.
Unless you're just lining up and you're playing like press man
Mhm.
across the board against everybody, and your dudes are better than their dudes.
Yeah.
Which how often is that going to happen when you have two receivers that are going to the NFL and one of them is a Bolitnikoff winner?
Mhm.
Uh, Unless you have that, like the greatest secondary in college football, you're not going to cover it because they're just going to run away from your leverage, and then Hooker just gets to sit there and read half the field and then
Mhm.
just throw it 40 yards down the field, and behind a right tackle to win the top 10. So
It's true.
it's very much a we're better than you offense, and you
Mm.
know what we're doing, and we know that you know what we're doing, and it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Uh, and that's hard to translate to the NFL because it's not full field reads.
Mhm.
The language is different. The verbiage is different. The routes are different. Um, the timing is different.
Yeah.
Like it's he will like Hooker will take time
Mhm.
to adjust the NFL, and I don't think he's going to play as a rookie at all because he has to completely rewire how he sees the game, and
Yeah.
that should be taken into account not just for him but for any prospect coming out of Tennessee.
So, Brett, let me ask you this. Given all of those factors, and given the fact that he's coming off an ACL tear when mobility was his primary asset, in my opinion, why did Hendon Hooker then go so high? Because we see guys like Sam Howell who are in simplistic offenses who honestly have more age on their side and then also health more on their side than Hooker. Why would Hendon Hooker go early third versus, a fifth round pick?
He's incredible off the field.
Mm,
Work ethic, leadership,
yeah.
intelligence, all that kind of stuff. Like they believe in the guy, right? They're betting
Mm,
on the person more
understand.
so than they're betting on the film. That's kind of my take on it. Is like he's
Okay.
so incredible off the field that they're like, we can figure it out.
Yeah. Understandable. So I know that you've dug a little bit into Olu Fashanu's tape. Obviously, super young starter last year. And, some people thought he was going to come out. People were suggesting he could be a top 15 pick. And looking at how the left tackles went off the board, arguably could have been. And I obviously saw some rawness in his game. Understandable. Kid's young, right? He needs a little bit more time, a little bit more polish. But we've kind of already coordinated him as this creme de la creme, this top tier tackle that's probably better than any of the ones that we've seen this past draft. I'm a Joe Alt guy, but I know that you haven't gone fully deep into Joe Alt. So that's why I'm highlighting Fashanu here. What do you think about him right now, and versus how, like, where you think he will develop, where he can develop the most?
Again, this is another age and tools. That's what you're
Yeah.
betting on, right?
Yeah.
And it's not that dissimilar to Tristan Wirfs when Wirfs was coming out. He had a lot of stuff he had to clean up.
Mhm.
A lot to clean up. Like he gave up inside counters like crazy when he was at
Mhm.
Iowa. But
Yeah.
he was so toolsy and so young and so freakish that you're just kind of betting on the kid and betting on that he still hasn't even fully grown yet, and
Mhm.
that you're putting faith in your offensive line coach to take the athlete and fix him.
Mm.
And that's why he would have gone in the top 15 this year. I
Yeah.
firmly believe that. And he'll probably go that high in this next coming draft just because he is so gifted. And
Mhm.
when it comes down to it, like tackle's one of the positions that you got to have a gifted athlete at, and
Yeah.
he's it.
Okay. So I'm curious then. I'm sure you probably thought you should have come out, but what do you think his reasoning would be to return if he already has that high level draft stock?
I mean, a lot of it is he probably felt like he wasn't ready because he is young.
Yeah.
He probably felt like he still had some more development to
Mm.
do so that he
Yeah.
could hit the ground running a little bit better as a rookie.
Mhm.
Um, if I was him, I would have come out. But when it comes to like he's going to make money with NIL anyway, so it's not like he's feeling as much financial pressure.
It's fair.
Um, you know, maybe school's very important to him and his family. Like I'm not going to like besmirch him for doing
Yeah.
it.
Yeah,
For
of
me,
course.
it's like if I'm healthy and I have a shot to get first round NFL money, I'm going to do it. But like, there's a lot of reasons these days why kids might not.
That's fair.
Um, but he just felt like maybe he wasn't ready. And like, I think that if you're a 19 or 20-year-old kid and you're asking yourself, can I block TJ Watt tomorrow? Your answer is probably no, right?
Yeah.
So, so you go back to school for a year and you figure it out.
Thanks for stroking the ego on that one.
Yeah.
So you were talking about how he has the tools, but he also can make big progression with the right line coach if you have the trust in him. So realistically speaking, I know the Eagles are probably going to be down the board way too far to be in reach of Fashanu, and we all know Stoutland's a freaking beast when it comes to developing O linemen. Besides that, realistically, what type of coaches would you want Fashanu to go to who might not be on a team that's performing too well this year?
Oh, I'm trying to think who's going to be bad this year.
Yeah, that's a bet on its own.
I'd be interested. Not that I think the Bears are going to be bad, but they might be in
Mhm.
range, depending on what's happening with Braxton Jones, right? Because they
Yeah.
took Braxton Jones, who was again freaky athlete, fifth
Mhm.
round pick. You're gambling on tools, and he was a starting caliber left tackle as a fifth round rookie.
Mhm.
Um, and we like to see if he could continue that development path as a fifth rounder. But if he doesn't, I think if they can do it with him, they could probably do it with Olu. Um,
Fair.
and so
Mm.
plus it's a system that I think would kind of protect him a little bit just because they don't do that much like straight up like 5-step drop, 7-step
Yeah.
drop, like go ahead, pass protect on an island. They don't do that as much there.
Yeah.
So I think he'd be limited in his exposure.
Mhm.
But I think Chicago would be a good place for him.
I like that. It's a weird thing, but I was also raised a Bears fan. I had Chicago and Steelers memorabilia on my wall, so I do have some form of partiality to both teams. It would be intriguing because I never thought about when you were talking about how they drafted Braxton Jones for those tools and were able to develop him, how that could be something to translate over to a higher level prospect. So I like that for sure. And I want to bring up something that we talked about earlier, how you're talking about Tristan Wirfs being beaten by inside counter moves back at Iowa. I actually had that same issue with Tevin Jenkins. It was the first year I was scouting. I saw a lot of times he would over pursue and just let up somebody right to the inside. Do you think the difference between someone like Tevin and someone like Tristan Wirfs is basically based on that athleticism, the ability to quickly change directions and being able to have a little bit more intricacy to their game? Or is there a different layer to it than just the play style?
I think also it depends on what he's being coached to do, right?
Sure.
Because there are some teams, and I don't know if Oklahoma State was one of them,
Mhm.
where they're like, "Hey, get to your landmark. If you're going to lose anywhere, lose inside because our quarterback likes to run." Right?
Mhm.
Like that was a big thing where with Baker Mayfield with the Browns, they're like, if you're going to do anything for the right tackle, if you're going to do anything, overset because Baker's always so deep in the pocket anyway
Yeah.
that if you overset and you invite it inside, and Baker's really good in terms of throwing while he's on the move to his right. So if you're and they I can't remember the name of the type of protection that they call it, but
Mhm.
it's basically like inviting and forcing the inside counters so that the
Interesting.
quarterback can get out in space. And some teams like actively do that on purpose, right?
Huh.
I don't know if Oklahoma State was doing that or not, but it is something that I've always kind of looked out for of like, are they oversetting on purpose or are they straight up losing?
Interesting. So this is why I bring you on, Brett, because you, even though I feel pretty confident in my offensive line evaluations, you still are able to give me a thing or two. Because at that time they had Spencer Sanders, so I mean, obviously he's extremely mobile, and I believe that that could have been something they were inviting because Spencer is very good on the run and very good when the pocket breaks down. Very intriguing. So, what other prospects have you seen in 2024? Just to give a little bit of a sneak peek and also, as a Steelers fan, pretty happy that one of your guys in Trice was able to fall to us in the seventh. But maybe give a little bit more love to that seventh rounder as well, because you had him, I think, what, a late second, and that is
Yeah,
pretty awesome. If I say so myself.
I had him at CB5 in this class. Apparently, the only reason he fell is medical.
Okay.
Um, that's it. Like that's literally the only reason. And I guess
Yeah.
there's a lot of teams that just didn't have him on the board at all
Wow.
because of medical. And the Steelers, who they took a lot of medical gambles this
Mhm.
year,
Yes.
they're like, if it works, great. We got a starting corner, and if
Hmm.
it doesn't, who cares? It was a seventh round pick.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, he was unfortunately just one of those guys. And I didn't have the medicals before the draft, which is why I
Mhm.
was so confused when he was falling. And then I asked around, and it's like, oh yeah, shit was
Yeah.
fucked. Uh, so that's why.
Gotcha.
But
Great.
as for guys coming out next year,
Mhm.
the only other one that I've really done a bunch of work on just because I find him so fun is
Mhm.
Bowers. Like
Okay.
he's nuts.
Yeah,
He's
break
so
him down really quick for us because I think we've all seen plenty of him, but we just kind of probably want to hear a Brett Coleman breakdown rather than just our own.
just the way he moves. Like
Mhm.
it's unnatural for somebody his size to move like that.
Yeah.
It's very Kyle Pitts ish, right?
Mhm.
And Kyle Pitts is another one of these guys where it's like, is he a receiver? Is he a tight end? And the answer is yes. And I legitimately think you could line up Bowers a wide receiver and be totally
Yeah.
fine. Um,
Okay.
he is such a special mover.
Mhm.
And even if he doesn't test like Kyle Pitts, I think he's going to test like Tyler Eifert,
Okay.
who pre-injury, Tyler Eifert was that dude, right? Tyler
Mhm.
Eifert was unstoppable before he got hurt at the Pro Bowl, kind of
Mhm.
derailed his career.
Yeah.
But it's that type of just big, athletic, smooth mover that linebackers are too slow, safeties are too small. There's
Mhm.
just not really a good answer for him.
Understandable. So let's just assume he tests out like Kyle Pitts. You have him or Marvin Harrison, and your tight end role, you have someone who's starter quality, but maybe not close to the elite talent of Brock Bowers, but certainly good enough, like not a tomato can, so to speak. Who would you choose in that situation? You have a good enough wide receiver core, you have a good enough tight end core, but you still want to get that marquee player, that gold jacket or unique style player. What would you be going after and why?
I'd go after Marvin, and I think we just saw this scenario play out with Jamar
Yeah.
and Pitts, right? It's like
Mm.
looking back, who'd you rather have? You'd rather have Jamar Chase because even the best tight ends, right? The best tight ends, like what are they going to get?
Mm.
1,100 yards, 1,200 yards. Like that's on the absolute top end. That's like historically good.
Yeah.
Like Travis Kelsey's the only one where he puts up like 13, 1,400 yards. We don't bat an eye, right? He's the only
Mm.
one ever to do that.
Yeah.
Uh, and so it's like if we're looking at receiving production, and the best case scenario historically is like 11 to 1,200 yards, whereas best case scenario for somebody of Marvin's talent at receiver is we're looking at like 15, 1,600 a year.
Mhm.
In terms of pure receiving production, that's more valuable. And the thing is, if you're looking at Bowers of like, okay, if he's a two, let's just say two-way player, you can line him up at Y. He's going to kick everybody's ass in the run game and everything like that. That's also amazing.
Yeah.
There's only been one of those as well, which was Gronkowski, somebody who's a dominant receiver and dominant Y. So it's like,
Mhm.
unless you're betting that he is one of the two out of the three greatest tight ends ever with Travis Kelsey or Rob Gronkowski,
Mhm.
you take Marvin. If you think he's one of those guys, you take him. But
Okay.
it's I struggle with comparing somebody to one of the best players in the history of the sport. Uh,
It's
it's
tough.
I don't know if I'm willing to go that far with it, right? But
Okay.
if you think he's that, fine, take him. If not, you take the receiver.
Gotcha. And, I mean, yeah, it's a valid point there. I didn't even really exactly fully think about the 1,100 yards for an elite tight end versus, 1,600, even beyond that. I mean, we've seen receivers get up into the 1,800 mark. As a Steelers fan, I saw Antonio Brown do it plenty of times. I mean, this guy was an absolute machine. So, yeah, great point. Great point for sure. And, I have a question about that. What would be the point where you feel comfortable going Brock over Marvin? Like, how good of a receiving core should you have versus how poor of a tight end core should you have before you really start saying, well, maybe this guy doesn't have the exact target share the way that our tight end does, or maybe our offense values tight ends and kind of needs that guy to be more of a surefire guy in the short range rather than just an elite receiver.
I would still take. I mean, this is where we start to get into the financial part because
Mm,
even if you already have a good receiving core,
yeah.
what are good receiving cores? Expensive.
Yeah.
So I would still take Marvin because I'm getting 5, maybe 6 years of potentially elite receiver play that
Okay.
isn't going to cost me $30 million a year. And if I got
Yeah.
to go pay a tight end, I'll
Hmm.
go pay Dalton Schultz. I'm not going to go pay 30 million for 6 straight years for like a Tyreek, right? Like
Yeah.
that's a 2 year band-aid type financial
Ooh.
situation. So I'd rather take the receiver. And if
Yeah.
I can save money by offloading somebody, I'll do that.
I like that. Okay, yeah, good idea bringing up the money there. So I had a thought process and it just slipped my mind. But thinking about the money wise, that is extremely intriguing because of the fact these receivers are fetching these way higher prices. So the return on your investment, if you are going to be getting someone of gold jacket territory, is essentially going to be 30 million versus maybe at max 20, right? I mean, we're talking about extreme like bumping up the pay for a tight end. Now, this is the question I had for you. There we go. When it comes to the NFL, obviously these front offices are not perfect. They all make mistakes. We even see, I mean, the Raiders' 2 first-round picks from a couple of years ago, no longer in the NFL, behind bars soon, to be honest. But regardless, what do you think the NFL lacks in terms of prioritizing certain positions? For me, I think they don't value offensive line enough. I see a lot of teams that are just trying to piece it together with solid offensive lines, maybe even subpar, and value the weapons more when I think you should build from the trenches out. What do you think the NFL needs to focus more on versus what they're already doing?
Like in terms of team building,
Yeah,
like
yeah, in terms of team
um,
building.
I'm a big proponent of building down the middle.
Yeah,
And with the one exception of like you need to have at least one great corner and at least one great receiver. But in
mm,
terms of where the core of your talent needs to be, it needs to be down the middle because most of the game is played down the middle.
yeah,
Um, your offensive line is only good as your worst offensive lineman because if one guy gets beat, all of them might as well got beat. Like you can't
mm,
afford to have one shitty offensive lineman because it's going to wreck everything anyway.
yeah,
Same thing with defensive linemen. Like when Daquan Jones went out, and the Bills were relying on Ed Oliver to stop outside zone in the playoffs, they couldn't do it because Ed was getting blown off the ball. And as long as one guy's getting blown off the ball, it wrecks the fit, and then everything that everybody else does almost doesn't matter, right? You're
yeah,
still going to give up 5 yards carry.
mhm,
So you're only as good as your worst guy down the
yeah.
middle, and you can't afford to have a stinker, especially in the trenches. You just can't do it.
I love that idea because it's so true. When you have one weak link, it's easy to expose it, and it really does nullify the job of the 4 other offensive linemen that could be doing well. Because the goal is for all 5 of them to work as a unit to make sure that the quarterback doesn't get absolutely obliterated, which in that situation, he got obliterated. So love that. But do you think that it's almost the opposite when it comes? I know you said you need one great corner, one great receiver. Do you think when it comes to weapons, it's more so quality than or just like singular quality where you do just need 1 or 2 guys versus more cohesion with the rest of the units on the inside on the trenches?
It's more so the reason why I think you need one great one on offense and one on defense is you just need somebody who, when you're inevitably given on 3rd and 7 a one-on-one opportunity, you got to go
Mm,
win. The Cardinals offense with DeAndre Hopkins was way different than the Cardinals offense without. Even though they had talented guys, they had fast
yeah.
guys, they had a bunch of speed on the field. They didn't have anybody who could just go win a one-on-one.
Mm,
And you can't you can't win games in the NFL unless you can go win one-on-ones at some point
That's fair.
eventually. You have to be
Yeah.
able to do it.
Okay.
And same thing goes with corner.
Mm.
Eventually, you're gonna have to leave one of your corners on an island, and they have to survive. They
Yeah.
have to win. You can scheme up ways to give everybody else in your secondary help.
Mhm.
You can help all of them. One of them has to survive on their own.
Mm.
So you better have somebody who can do it.
That's fair. So basically, when shit hits the fan, you need someone that you can rely on.
Exactly.
Okay, gotcha. That's yeah, I like that. Obviously, as a Steelers fan, I was a huge fan of Joey Porter Jr. and him paired up with Patrick Peterson is wonderful. So finally, we actually have some form of hope in terms of our corners. Hallelujah! And it brings the question to my mind because I think the Steelers undervalued the cornerback position for a long time. In terms of the draft, what position do you think deserves a little bit more love and a little bit more value placed on it than it actually does?
Center.
Yeah,
For sure.
yeah,
It's gotta be center. All the best ones always go in, like, the 2nd round,
yep.
and, like, you're getting, like, an all-pro, like, Creed Humphrey at, like, the 60-something pick, and it's
Mhm.
like, this isn't okay." Like, he was one of the 30 best players in the class, and he went
Mhm.
mid, late 2nd round just because he's a center.
Yeah.
Same thing happened with JMS. He dropped to the 2nd round. He was one of the best players in the class. He's
Mhm.
gonna play for 10 plus years, which is a rare thing, by the way. Like, people
Yeah.
throw, "Oh, he's gonna be a 10-year starter." Usually for like top tier interior offensive linemen, they actually are 10-year starters. Like most other positions, when you say that, it's kind of blowing smoke. When it
Mhm.
comes to elite interior offensive linemen, that is A, historically the position that hits the most if you invest early in it.
Mm.
And B, they play the longest. So the fact that all these elite centers that you know are going to play for a long time and you know they play a very important role,
Mhm.
not just in the run game and in the pass game too, because they call protections, a lot of them,
Yeah.
and they're always going in the 2nd round, and you're getting like all pros in the 2nd round for free. I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't understand why the league doesn't invest in it, because
I
when you
don't
have
either.
a bad center, your offense literally doesn't work. Like, it just
Yeah.
doesn't function at all.
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree with you. They are I mean, I got to see Marquise Pouncey for the majority of my life, pretty much be able to dictate every single thing that's happening on the field. So I know the value of a really good center. Now, I have 2 more questions for you before we end off here. And one, well, actually, it's not 2 questions, but one of them's a recommendation. So when it comes to interior defensive linemen, what do you look for? Because I have a man that's coming out this year in Jerzon Newton out of Illinois, where I see him in a straight line. He looks like a freight train. I'm saying this guy might run 4.7 at 300 pounds easily. And like you will see this speed build up to where I cannot imagine the fear seeing this man, and he has a gut too. So you just see this gut flying as he's coming at you like 20 miles an hour. And for me, I love seeing hand technique. He also plays on the outside as well. But being able to see someone have such unique hand fighting technique to where he can just disarm, so to speak, an interior offensive lineman, get through and get to the quarterback. What do you think is the most underrated thing to look at when it comes to interior defensive linemen? What do you usually look for?
Knockback.
Yeah,
Um,
impact.
like you have to have heavy hands and
Mm,
explosion through the hips at the snap,
mm,
or you will get run over in the NFL. Like,
yeah.
you straight up will get run over. You have to be able to put a dent in the offensive line,
Mhm,
to mess up angles, mess up blocking angles, mess up
mm,
the path of a puller. Um, you need to be physical. Like, you need to be strong and physical. It's not just about taking on double teams. It's about, can you lock out one on one at a guard and peek and then shed and make the tackle. Like, if you're weak in the NFL, you will get exploited over and over and over again. That was a big reason why I wasn't a fan of the Zach Pickens pick
mm,
by Chicago, because like
yeah.
you watch him against Arkansas and Ricky Stromberg fucking killed him, like
Mhm,
just ran him over,
yeah.
completely ran him over, because Ricky Stromberg has NFL strength, right? And Zach Pickens, like, buddy, you do that in the NFL, you're going to be on your butt
Yep.
40 plays a game. So like that's what I look at with interior defensive linemen, is like, show me physicality, show me pop in your hands, show me explosion through the hips. We
Yeah.
can work with it. We can work on everything else. But if you can't play on 1st and 10, I don't really want you.
That's fair. Yeah, understandable for sure. Now, I've heard a lot of really good things about this 2024 class defensive interior. So, definitely, if you're excited about building through the centers or building through the interior, that's going to be very exciting for you because there's a lot of really good dudes. But one last question for you. When it comes to scouting, when it comes to even the NFL teams looking at players, what do you think is arguably the most underlooked trait in a player or a position? It's like you said, blowback on a defensive interior. And what do you think is kind of the most overlooked versus underlooked?
Um, Overlooked, I would say it's character and work ethic, and that's the hardest to nail down, right?
Yeah.
That's why it's so important to have a good relationship with the strength coaches at these programs, have good relationship with position coaches at these programs, get a good sense of the kid. Um, how does he work? How does he think? How does he learn? Like you have to also figure out what's a good way to coach him. Does he fit with our coaching philosophy? Do we have to coach him differently than the other guys? Um, and I think that people lose track of the fact that football isn't just football. Like
Mhm.
it's people, and people are on the field, and you have to understand the person.
Yeah.
And if the person doesn't fit the organization for whatever reason, you shouldn't draft him. It doesn't matter how talented he is.
Mhm. That's totally understandable. Brett, thank you so much for saying that. And I just have one question in terms of advice for people like myself and even those who are following me. When it comes to scouting these players, we have a very hard time because we don't have good relationships with the strength and conditioning coaches and the positional coaches. What should we be doing to try to figure out the personality? Because all we can really see is the tape and maybe the Twitter feed, but it's a little bit harder to really gauge the person behind the player.
There's not really anything you can do
Yeah.
other than getting to talk to them. Like that's why I really advocate for like media people to go to the Shrine Bowl
Mhm.
because the Shrine Bowl, like you can get 15 to 20 minutes with these guys and really have a good conversation. Like there's other All Star games where maybe you can get like a minute with them in a scrum surrounded by a bunch of people after practice, but like they got to talk to scouts first. And like there's a media day, but there's no real order to it. And like you're hoping to get one question in, and most of the time it's like a 10-second question. You don't get to have a conversation. You don't get to have like a good sit down, like get a sense of who these guys are. Whereas we went to the Shrine Bowl and like they literally bring in every single position group for like an hour. You
Mhm.
just pick out whoever you want. You can talk to them as long as you want. You get these great interviews. You get to know
Yeah.
them as people. You get to know their background. You get to watch film with them. Like it was so like we did with Zay Flowers at the Shrine
Mhm.
Bowl. Like we just got to talk with him for like 20 minutes.
Mm.
Um, and like that made a huge impact on how I saw not just Zay the player, but Zay the person, and
Yeah.
why I knew like, yeah, this guy's going first round. Like I knew it back in January. Because like there's no way that he didn't light up every single room he was in for actual team interviews. And
Gotcha.
so like that's why I really advocate for guys to go to the Shrine Bowl, or at
Mm.
least media to go to the Shrine Bowl, because you get that access and opportunity. And then beyond that, it's like networking, right? Eventually like you can build up a network where you can ask you can text certain people, but like, are there any landmines I should be aware of here?
Mhm.
Like there were some that I caught wind of that made it so I kept guys off my board completely. And I still get questions about it, about
Mm.
like, where's this, where's that? And it's not my place to say things and report it, but like it definitely influenced who I talked about.
Yeah.
and there were some guys that went undrafted that people were like, I didn't expect that. And in the back of my head, I'm like, I did, and
Mhm.
like, again, I'm not a news guy, so I'm not going to like report that stuff. But like, as you build up a network, you can catch wind of guys that you should be leery of, and you can
Yeah.
in opposite, like you catch wind of guys that absolutely you should be talking about because their character is just incredible.
Yeah.
That was a big reason why I was talking up Chandler Zavala the entire draft process, because I'm like, this guy's amazing, like
Mm.
not just as a talent but as a human being, and like didn't get a combine invite. It was completely overlooked by the media, but like the teams loved him,
Yeah.
loved him, partially because his character was so good, in addition to being a great player. So
Mm.
it kind of goes both ways on it. And as you develop a network, you kind of pick up on some of those landmines that we didn't used to be able to get.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Well, Brett, thank you so much for your time. Your insight is invaluable. Obviously, you've earned the respect of myself as well as everybody else in this industry. So, thank you again for coming on. Feel free to give yourself one more shout out.
Yeah, I'm working on some really interesting projects, different than what I normally do on the channel right now. Uh, Well, I guess not that different, but it's kind of like on the relationship between cover three and the Tampa two and how they're kind of like the same thing,
Mhm.
but also definitely the same thing, and kind of like an exploration of the Monte Kiffin coaching tree. And then I got another one coming out on like the zone run game and just kind of breaking down macro topics that I've never got to really talk about before that I think football fans would find interesting.
Awesome, guys. Go check them out. You guys are already subscribed there anyway, so I don't really need to say anything about that. But thank you all for watching. Thank you again, Brett. See you guys on the far side.